Welcome to this panel discussion in this 109th session of the IOM Council. We thought that it would be an important opportunity for us to have an open discussion on the issue of internal displacement. In fact, this is a way of marking the 20th anniversary of the principles on the guiding principles on internal displacement, but also it's an opportunity to verify that the global compacts that we have been talking in these last few months, the refugees and the migration, do not cover exactly this reality. So we thought that instead of debating IDPs by default, we should assess the issue directly and have a frank conversation with our member states. And in that sense, we want to make it clear, in the perspective of IOM, dealing with IDPs is a sovereign national responsibility, that's clear, but we cannot ignore the reality. And the reality is that there are 40 million people in the world that are considered IDPs. From our side, and I'm sure Philippe will have also there is its own figures, from our side, for instance, out of the 28.9 million people that we assist, 2/3 are IDPs. So this shows that the issue cannot be ignored by the international community. And at the same time as we pay tribute to the guiding principles, we think that a lot has changed in 20 years' time. And the moment has come to have a debate. We know that the Secretary General of the United Nations has received a letter from several member states raising the issue. He has asked our colleague Mark Lowcock to coordinate a response. There will be clearly a willingness from the UN system that states take the lead in the response, and the multilateral system will be prepared to react to the suggestions about the framework that could be most useful to address this challenge in global mobility. Having said that, I will just thank the members of the panel for their generosity and willingness to join us. We have with us His Excellency Ato Mitiku Kassa, Commissioner, National Disaster Risk Management Commission of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Christos Stylianidis, Commissioner in the European Union for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. Jos Verbeek from the World Bank, replacing Mahmoud Moeldin, who could not be present at the last minute. And Mrs. Alexandra Bilak, Director for the International Displacement Monitoring Center. So I would suggest each of the panelists to give a presentation of 10 minutes, and then we go to the floor for an interactive dialogue. Thank you. Thank you for coming. High Commissioner, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Vitrono. I am Director General. Dear panelists, Excellencies, representatives of IOM member states, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the high-level panel for inviting me as one of the panelists to contribute to taking stock of how issues associated with internal displacement are currently tackled in multilateral context and the correlation between internal displacement and cross-border movements both due to natural and man-made hazards and associated disasters. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, nowadays natural and man-made disasters have caused massive internal displacement around the world and have created a number of social, economic, political and psychological damage on displaced persons, governments and international community. Internal displacement is one of the current challenges that mostly in countries that are frequently affected by natural and man-made disasters such as climate and conflict-induced displacement. States which are vulnerable to these kinds of hazard and associated disaster should have appropriate policy and implementing strategies that enable them to prevent, to respond and rehabilitate efficiently and effectively. Governments have to create conducive working environment for humanitarian development partners, which are in line with government policies and strategies as well as international laws. The government should lead all efforts of government executive bodies, multilateral, bilateral, international, and local NGOs and community structures toward the shared vision, goals, objectives, and outcomes. There has to be an understanding that international displacement would have a spillover effect and could be incubation center for international migration. Therefore, government should create intergovernmental forum and multilateral dialogue, especially with countries that are affected by frequent climate-induced disasters, politically unstable and fragile nature. There has to be a mechanism and an instrument to bring donors and humanitarian development partners to finance and implement, to control and prevent internal displacement, and to respond well when it occurs, as well as efficient and effective rehabilitation that ensure durable solutions. The state should focus on the root causes of internal displacement and migration. It should be critically addressed, especially investment on poverty reduction, unemployment of youth, respecting rule of law, peace and reconciliation, climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts must get priority. Furthermore, multilateral, multi-agency, international cooperation and joint humanitarian development interventions aiming at durable and sustainable solutions must be put in place. Governments together with international partners should implement the comprehensive refuge response framework and the decisions which were made in the World Humanitarian Summit to bridge humanitarian and development divide, humanitarian development nexus in the new way of working. On top of that, the three global agendas, namely Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, Paris Climate Agreement, and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which falls in the same period, 2015 through 2013, should address the root cause of internal displacement, responding and finding durable solutions for internal displacement. All states, multilaterals, bilaterals, international and local NGOs, and community structures should include internal displacement agenda in their short, medium, and long-term plans. There has to be multi-year plan with predictable resource allocation and flexible investment plan. Proper development policy, strategy and plans, inclusive and participatory development, peace and democracy, and political commitment must be seen from leadership of those countries where internal displacement is a key challenge. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me now bring your attention to my country, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the countries which are currently experiencing a large number of internal displaced per person, 2.6% of its population, due to climate and conflict-induced displacement. Conflict-induced IDPs comprises 82%, while climate-induced IDPs comprise 18.18%. Internal displacement is one of the issues that have been given to attention by the government agenda, and it is included in the 2018 Humanitarian Disaster Resilient Mid-Year Plan, which is prepared for the second half of 2018. According to the 2018 Ethiopian Humanitarian Disaster Risk Resilience Mid-Year Revised Plan, 7.95 million people needs food and non-food support for the second half of 2018, of which 2.8 million are internally displaced persons, and the resource required to address the need of these IDPs is estimated to be 106 million USD. As the first installment, the government of Ethiopia has allocated 76.4 million USD for response, recovery, and rehabilitation activities. Regarding government ongoing initiative, the following activities have been done and will continue. 1, emergency supply, food and non-food at IDP site and at host community. 2, deploying professionals from online ministries to manage the IDP case. 3, National Disaster Risk Management Commission is mandated to coordinate all efforts of line ministries, regional bureaus, multilateral, bilateral, NGOs, local NGOs with relevant cluster. 4, creating conducive working environment for humanitarian development partners at all administrative levels. 5, establish Emergency Coordination Center, EOC, to make response operation efficient and effective. 6, deploy security forces to conflict area to keep the IDP safe and secured. 7, deploy prosecutor to bring those who have been involved in the conflict as a mastermind, initiator and performance to justice. 8, peace and reconciliation process as part of durable solution at all tiers. 9, development intervention through water-centered approach in areas which are frequently affected by El Nino, La Nina, negative Indian Ocean dipole, induced drought. 10, recovery rehabilitation intervention for IDPs to attain durable solutions. Ethiopia has signed Kampala Convention, and it is about to be ratified by the House of Parliament. The international IDP guiding principles, which are consistent with international humanitarian rights law and international humanitarian law, has been adopted and included in the Ethiopian Constitution. Therefore, security, access, full participation, involvement, and availability of basic socio-economic services has been taken and implemented as IDP condition. The 2018 Ethiopian Humanitarian Disaster Resilience Plan, having 3 pillars, comprising all disaster risk reduction, disaster management, and post-disaster components, have been prepared based on the new way of working. Regarding the disaster governance issue, Ethiopia has given due attention and at its prior agenda. There is a strong coordination mechanism in place to combat the different hazards and associated disasters. The National Disaster Risk Management Council, chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, is at the top, comprising the Disaster Risk Management focal leading ministers, with National Disaster Risk Management Commission as a secretary for all national concerns. Under the National Disaster Risk Management Council, there are strategic multi-agency coordination (SMAC), co-chaired by National Disaster Risk Management Commissioner and UN Resident Coordinator, with members from line ministries, UN agencies, bilaterals, and major international NGOs. More technical working arrangements are tasked on cluster arrangement and coordinator role, like the Disaster Risk Management Working Group, replicated in regions and supported by cluster co-chaired task forces, sectoral task forces, comprising agriculture, health, nutrition, water and sanitation, food protection, and shelter and education. IDP caseload have been addressed by activating emergency operation centers in the conflict site with joint arrangement of government humanitarian partners. Such practices allowed us to timely respond, save lives of the people, and create dialogue on how durable solution is designed and implemented. In the coordination mechanism, IOM, as a close partner of the government, through its displacement tracking matrix, DTM, has been collecting data on internal displacement in Ethiopia since July 2016, and it is published by monthly report on the current status of internal displacement in the country. The data which IOM collects and shares is intended to serve a range of partners, including Ethiopian government, UN agencies, local and international NGOs, as well as donors, in order to inform response planning and more target funding allocation. In addition, IOM is responsible for NFI shelter cluster as a chair and the major implementing partners in the country. Finally, the participation, coordination, and partnership modality of durable solution for IDP in the government is tasked under the Disaster Risk Management Technical Working Group, led by the government of Ethiopia, represented by the National Disaster Risk Management Commission. It is mutually agreed to have the resident coordinator's office, and I am co-chairing the working group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And now I would ask Filippo Grandi, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, to join the panel. Please, Filippo, you have the floor.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Antonio, and thanks for the opportunity of being here. And I think the first question one should ask is, why am I here on this panel? So just a few thoughts about this before I have thoughts about the subject. One is that modern times, if nothing else, but there's many other things, but modern times, modern circumstances, contemporary circumstances prompt IOM and UNHCR to work very closely together. We see it in response to the situation in Venezuela and in South America. We see it in Libya. I think the DG has spoken about it in his opening remarks. So this is one further area in which we're both involved, both play an important role, and where I think that the synergy between our two organizations is very important. So it has that significance. At least I see it. I hope IOM sees it in the same manner. Second, of course, and I'll speak about it, there are many synergies between refugee movements, which are our core responsibility, and internally displaced. And third, and I will also elaborate on that, of course, we often tend to look at internal displacement as a humanitarian problem, which it is, and needs to be addressed with humanitarian means, but it is much more than that, like any displacement. It has legal, political, developmental implications, but it has also an essential protection dimensions, which really addresses the core aspect of the mandate of my own organization, hence our deep interest in this issue. It is also, of course, and the DG has already mentioned that, we are at a moment of crisis with many conflicts, but also of opportunity, perhaps. The internally displaced people are not directly covered by the two global compacts, although they're mentioned for a variety of reasons, but both compacts have developed a number of instruments that I believe, some of which I believe are usable in improving, in responding to internal displacement, as is the title of this panel. We have as was mentioned by Antonio, we have the 20th anniversary of the guiding principles and the plan of action that we have developed, which is public, that we have developed in response or on the occasion of that. Next year will be the 10th anniversary of the Kampala Convention on IDPs, very relevant in Africa, which is also at the same time as the 50th anniversary of the OAU Convention. So an important year to talk about displacement in Africa, forced displacement in Africa. So it is a good time, I think, to revisit the situation, to look at gaps, to revitalize a solution, and to expand the international support base for these efforts, and as the Commissioner said, national efforts to address these matters. Three quick points. One is protection. We strongly believe that a protection-based approach must be at the heart of any response to a crisis of internal displacement, because they are in turn inevitably the result of a failure of protection, sometimes voluntary, unfortunately, sometimes due to circumstances. Because if we don't respond in a manner that is conscious of the protection challenges, we're destined to fail, as we have seen many times. There's been a lot of emphasis over the years on the emergency aspect of the response. And of course, that is very important, especially in some dramatic situations, but it has to be coupled with the awareness that there are other aspects of internal displacement that need to be addressed. Look at, for example, internal displacement in Syria, something that we've all been very much involved in addressing. Many IDPs in Syria are actually returning home, which is good. And we see through that, through the lens of that return, we see that the challenges are not just helping them, together with the government, rebuild their houses, but it's also addressing issues of property, issues, legal issues of documentation, and so forth. So we need to, I'm putting some concrete spin to the slogan protection at the center, because it has very concrete elements to it. We are discussing this matter very intensively in the context, in the UN Red Cross, NGO context of the Interagency Standing Committee. We have our biannual meeting on Monday, and this is very much one of the issues that is always on the agenda. The second point I wanted to quickly elaborate is this link between internal and external displacement, between IDPs and refugees. It's not always there, but in many cases it is. Think of a situation we've all been dealing with recently, which is the displacement of the Rohingya community in Myanmar. We should not forget that in Myanmar, as we have often discussed with the government of Myanmar, there is a sizable internal displacement among the Rohingya. In fact, more than 100,000 people displaced for the past 6, almost 7 years. We often think that if the IDP issue had been addressed, perhaps some of the reasons that caused the big exodus of last year could have been prevented. So there is a clear link, and this is just an example. So again, I think it is important, and this is another big focus of what we are trying to do in the interagency context, to look at solutions, both for IDPs and where the phenomenon exists also for refugees. Early solution before some of the pathologies that cause displacement are cemented and become very difficult to address. This, of course, raises an important point, valid for both IDPs and refugees. Sometimes among the solutions is return, voluntary return, of course, but sometimes that return is in very difficult circumstances. So how do we handle that? How do we address solutions from that angle? Many of us are out of 2 days of discussions over Afghanistan, another situation of big external and internal displacement. There was a strong emphasis on the need for comprehensive and area-based approaches to reintegration of returnees, IDPs and refugees. And this, of course, brings up a very key issue of the interface also in IDP context, which is very strong in the compacts between humanitarian and development, and I'm glad that the World Bank will talk later about it, about that sphere. And finally, just to say back to the Interagency Standing Committee, which will sit on Monday, that we are deeply involved in improving coordination between the different strands of humanitarian institutions to the response, supported by other initiatives with better data collection and so forth. So that's something that we're focusing on. And this includes, by the way, IOM and UNHCR. I think with the new DG, we've had already some important discussion on how in this, and in fact many other areas, this inevitable cooperation that brings us together needs to be better defined, and this is something that we're working on. I'll conclude just by saying that we need to look at this very seriously. I applaud IOM's initiative to call for this panel. It is an opportunity to remind everybody, and perhaps donors in particular, of the need to remain focused on this issue also in terms of funding. Commitments made in Istanbul, Grand Bargain and so forth, have not always been honored. You know, we all have to live up to those commitments, both in terms of coordination and efficiency on our side, but also in terms of support, flexible support on your side. This is particularly important in situations of internal displacement. Of course, internal displacement is a sensitive issue in many places, but dialogue, and I was glad to listen carefully to the Ethiopian statement, dialogue with the national authorities that ultimately have the responsibility. This is the most important point of internally displaced people. That dialogue is very important. To have this dialogue on our side in the most apolitical, in the most humanitarian manner, to dispel any notion that supporting IDPs corresponds to any other type of intervention and diminishing of sovereignty. No, it is a strengthening of the sovereignty of state to deal with people that are particularly affected by the circumstances, be they natural disasters or conflict in that particular country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Filippo. Now we go to the side of the donors. Christos, thank you for coming, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Director General. Dear colleagues, it's truly an honor to be here at today's Council, especially in the presence of the IOM's new Director General, Antonio Vitorino. I'm sure, my dear friend, your mandate, your tenure will be a great success.
Thank you.
Your political career so far, it is the evidence of your success and especially your excellent reputation as European Commissioner. So thank you for your invitation. And of course, today we are in the company of many distinguished colleagues to discuss, as Antonio, Filippo, and my friend from Ethiopia, a subject that touches all our hearts, essentially the lives of millions of internally displaced people. The numbers are truly shocking, Antonio already mentioned. So staggering, in fact, that the magnitude of the challenge can seem overwhelming. Just few numbers. Over 40 million people are displaced in their own countries by conflict and violence. Another 18 million are internally displaced by natural disasters due to climate change. So climate change is not fake news. This means that the majority of people forced to flee their homes remain in their own countries. So more than double the global figures for refugees. The internally displaced are among the most vulnerable people in the world. Their plight does not make the headlines, unfortunately. They do not find safe haven outside their countries, but within. They remain in their countries struggling with conflict and violence, unable to ensure their basic human rights, education, employment, safe accommodation, and so on. This large-scale displacement increases the burden on countries already struggling with man-made and natural disasters. Most tragically, internal displacement is devastating for individuals, their well-being, and their dignity. I saw this tragic reality firsthand many years in my country, my own country, and also in my visits to many humanitarian crises across the world. I met with internally displaced women, men, and children. But within these tragedies, I also witnessed individual stories of hope, courage, and dignity, and gestures of touching solidarity, in particular from host communities. So our global community is not standing by. As the number of IDPs continues to rise, we must do more to pinpoint the specific needs of these people, help countries provide for these needs, and ensure that their rights are upheld. Dear colleagues, the European Union is fully engaged in helping IDPs, protecting them, supporting them. We are bringing together global efforts and resources so no one is left behind. In fact, around, and this is my answer to my dear friend Filippo, in fact, about the donors, in fact, around 40% of our humanitarian aid goes to the internally displaced every year, 40%. Last year, we assisted internally displaced people in most of the top 20 affected countries. For example, first, inside Syria, our humanitarian assistance goes to life-saving and emergency operations, including for the internally displaced, for their basic survival, safe drinking water, sanitation and hygiene, food and child protection in particular. Second, in South Sudan, we fund projects to provide basic services, protection and shelter, including those living around UN peacekeeping bases, so-called protection of civilian sites. And third, in Nigeria and in DRC, in Democratic Republic of Congo, and in many other countries, we promote access to education and health, both for the displaced and for their host communities. But we can be more efficient and have greater impact. First, through collaboration. Filippo already mentioned and focused on this. Today's panel is an excellent example. Our panelists represent a broad spectrum of organizations, each with a fresh angle on how to improve our efforts, both from the humanitarian and development side, especially to overcome fragmentation. I encourage the humanitarian development communities to work more closely together, to leverage our strengths, to find creative solutions, and above all, to break down the silos that have traditionally separated us. This is the hard reality on the ground. This is the best way to design complementary programs to do the most good for the most people. Second point, through sustainability. Today, the average period of displacement is over 17 years. This longer time frame should inform our thinking, our problem solving. We need long-lasting, durable solutions. This long-term approach will also build self-reliance. 2 years ago, we presented a comprehensive EU approach on forced displacement and development for 2 reasons. First, to engage the international community, and second, to connect our efforts with national efforts. In Ethiopia, I visited, you remember, my dear friend, we tried to get in order to have this comprehensive approach, especially of the consequences of the climate change and the internally displaced people. We should also recognize that all internally displaced people have the right to return, but not all choose to do so. So we must consider lasting solutions for those who do not wish to return, such as settlement and urbanization programs. Finally, and this is my final point, we must work more with the internal displaced. Engage them in solutions that meet their needs, not our idea of their needs. They have a role to play in building peace, developing laws, and elaborating local and national development plans. Lasting solutions often start with ownership. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we mark the 20th anniversary of the guiding principles on internal displacement, a moment to highlight their struggle and celebrate their courage and resilience. We are united in calling for bold action to ensure that internally displaced people receive the protection and support that they so desperately need, and I strongly believe they deserve. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Christos. And now we believe that there is an important role to play by international financial organizations, especially in the link between IDPs and development, the bridge between humanitarian assistance and creating conditions for durable solutions, as Christos was saying, and livelihood. So the burden is on your shoulders.
Well, thank you very much. It feels quite heavy, to be honest. No, but thank you very much for inviting the bank to participate in this discussion. And I want to do a little bit also what the Commissioner already did before me, in a sense, Before diving into the World Bank Group's response to internal displacement, it might be useful to put indeed a few facts out there, because it helps to frame our response. And I think we already heard also from the Commissioner, we have about 40 million internally displaced people due to violent conflict. And we know with a steady rise in the number of conflict that we can assume that this will continue to rise. Crises are more and more protected. Human responses was often seen as something of a relative short nature. And development actors could wait until an all-clear sign was given before reactivating their programs. You know, with duration of crises of being more than 10 years or more, we have to stay engaged as development partners and IFIs. As we do, for example, in the moment in Yemen and Somalia. These are clear examples where together with the UN and also with other international organizations like ICRC, we have remained engaged. Second, and I think the Commissioner also mentioned this, we have about 19 million people who are displaced by disasters in 2017, natural disasters. And this is probably even underestimated because it doesn't even include people displaced due to slow onset of disasters like drought or rising sea levels. And I think also in that area, what we are seeing, that many of these crises cannot be solved within, say, a 6 months or a 12 months period. So we can, again, as development partners and international financial institutions like the World Bank, we cannot stay on the sidelines and think this is just a humanitarian issue to solve and we can wait. No, we have to stay engaged and we have to help with the financial implications of these type of crises. No. Also taking, of course, into account that many of the internally displaced people are in developing countries, our client countries. The bank has a role to play. And often what we have, of course, seen is that as an institution who really cares about ending poverty, that there is an issue of that actually poverty rates on the internally displaced people are much higher than on the general population. I remember the striking figure for Colombia that was used at one of the UN Chief Executive Board meetings a few years ago, that poverty under the internally displaced population was about 60%, while the average poverty numbers for Colombia showed 8%. Yeah? This is a striking difference. So hence, we really, as an institution that cares about ending poverty, we have to be engaged in the issues around internally displaced and focus on these internally displaced people. Now, I want to highlight 4 areas of the bank's engagement: data, finance, implementation, and prevention. As we pride ourselves to be an evidence-based organization, but we felt that our knowledge on the social and economic conditions of IDPs was lacking. So we have tried to initiate initiatives, and one important one is actually with UNHCR, by which we try to combine and coordinate our forces to be able to use the data that's available through UNHCR, in a sense, and use the capacity within the bank to analyze, say, household budget surveys like we do, to look at social and economic implications or situations and the needs of the internally displaced people, so that actually our interactions can be better geared towards helping them than we have done in the past. On financing, basically our shareholders, when we put forward the replenishment of IDA 18, and IDA, hopefully you know, is our window through which we provide resources to low-income countries. We actually doubled our resources available for not directly internally displaced people, but we doubled our resources for violent conflict and violence-affected states, where of course many of the internally displaced people are. So we moved on the IDA 18 from about an envelope from $7 billion for these type of situations under IDA 17 to $14 billion on the IDA 18. So we're really stepping up to the plate to help. Now, I must also say that for refugees, yeah, we have already developed more innovative instruments, actually. We have developed an instrument in particular used in Lebanon and Jordan to bring interest rates down to, thank you, Felipe, for reminding me it was Jordan. It's always good that we coordinate very well. To bring interest rates down, because of course countries which are middle income, they borrow normally from us for normal interest rates on the market. And then of course they have to borrow to help refugees who are, it's difficult for them often to sell that to their population, that they are borrowing at relatively high interest rates on which the World Bank makes a profit for dealing with refugees who are coming from other countries. So we have brought down, together with other partners like the Islamic Development Bank and many bilateral countries, to bring the interest rates down to what we call concessional levels, so that they don't pay market rates, but much more lower interest rates. And that's we have done so far about close to $2 billion, I think, or $500 million has been made available. Then, of course, we have a window on the IDA 18, where we actually work with UNHCR, particularly on eligibility, on providing resources to countries that have to deal with refugees and host communities, but then in low-income setting. And that's about $2 billion. And actually, that instrument is working very well. We've also stepped up our engagement to deal with the impact of climate change. At COP21 in Paris, the bank made a commitment to increase its portfolio, which at that time stood around 28% that had some climate impact, to around 30% by 2020. And actually, recently I heard our CEO, Kristalina Georgieva, saying that actually we have already reached almost 1/3 of our portfolio that has some some impact on dealing and mitigating and adaptation for climate. And of course, also there, we can argue, given that this type of events are happening more and more, we might even have to do more. We all have, of course, seen the IPCC report, and if these types are indeed going to happen, we will have more internally displaced people than we currently have because of that. Now, I also want to talk briefly about implementation. Here we work very much in partnership and with a focus on improving resilience of the people, internally displaced people, and address their vulnerabilities. I think I mentioned already Yemen and Somalia are often put forward as examples on how the bank has stepped up to the plate to continue funding for service delivery in these countries while there were internal conflict going on and people were internally displaced. In Somalia, I know we worked together with FAO and ICRC. And in Yemen, for example, we worked very closely together with WFP and UNICEF to deal with the issues that are emerging there. Now, on implementation also of our projects, we have become, I think, from the World Bank's perspective, more and more practical. As our CEO, Kristalina Georgieva, has said actually quite a few times, we need to work with people who have boots on the ground. If we are ourselves not able to be in the country anymore because of security reasons or others, then we need to work with whoever is there to be able to keep on reaching the people that deserve the services to be delivered. Now, of course, we also know that the increase, and I want to turn very briefly to prevention. And we know, of course, that the increase in crises all around the globe also made us think, all of us, of course, about what are actually these root causes of these conflicts and causing the internally displaced people. So actually there, the bank, together with the UN, for the first time actually, we prepared a report on looking at the root causes of crisis, and it's called the Pathways for Peace. And there now we're really at the situation that we are starting to look at how can we actually help countries to deal and in advance in such a way that this type of conflicts, internal conflicts, do not happen. And it has a lot to do with inclusivity and leaving no one behind, as you can imagine. Because also we know from, as the report points out, that if we put $1 in prevention, we're basically saving $16 down the road in what we otherwise have to do with respect to crisis. Now, in closing, let me say that the bank is here to stay. I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, you would not have seen the World Bank on any of these panels, maybe in IOM or maybe at a smaller side panel on some technical issues. But nowadays, we get invited to these things because we really have been asked by our shareholders to step up to the plate and to really deal with these issues much more upfront and much more in partnerships with the people we are sitting here on the panel. And actually, very recently, about a week ago, we had what we call our midterm review of how our IDA portfolio is performing, and this was done in Zambia. And it's very clear that the signals from the shareholders and our donors are that we have to stay engaged and that actually we have to do even more related to internally displaced people and also on refugees. And that will mean that probably the amounts will increase that we will make available. And also we have been told that we need to further increase concessionality, particularly for countries that have to deal with the influx of refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jos. Well, you are most welcome, and definitely we hope you stay. And now, to conclude the presentations, I would invite Alexandra Bilak, the Director for the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, to give us a presentation. Alexandra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Director General Vitorino and IOM for organizing this event and for inviting IDMC to speak. I've been asked to speak about data and why data on internal displacement is so critical. I'll also be speaking about what kind of data is actually needed for what kind of response, and saying a few words about the current global and national data landscapes. So it's obvious to me that we've come a long way since the guiding principles were adopted. We're now accessing a multitude of different sources of data that are allowing us to report more and more accurately on the global scope and scale of the phenomenon of internal displacement. But thanks to this data, we're not just reporting on the scale of internal displacement, we're also able to show and to say something about the severity and the diversity of this phenomenon across the world. We're looking at conflict-driven crises across sub-Saharan Africa, from Ethiopia to DRC, South Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, the Central African Republic, but of course also in the Middle East. We're reminded there of the importance of good data when we see how we've managed as a community to monitor displacement patterns under extremely difficult circumstances in countries like Syria and Iraq. But we see also that the opposite can hold true, that the absence of solid displacement data puts certain situations like the one we're seeing in Yemen right now at risk of becoming forgotten. So the progress we've made in getting near global coverage of displacement has also enabled us to firmly position the issue of disaster and climate-related displacement, but also displacement caused by criminal violence and development projects on the global map. Back in 1998, we were speaking of internal displacement primarily as a byproduct of conflict. Now we're reporting on over 150 countries across the world, and we're looking at internal displacement very much as a multi-causal and a multi-dimensional issue. We've got a pretty good sense now of the full scale of the phenomenon and what it looks like in different contexts. And it spans from government evacuations during tropical typhoons in Asia and hurricanes in the Atlantic, homes destroyed by earthquakes and tsunamis, to more hidden movements of people escaping gang violence in Central America, communities that are pushed off their lands to make way for major infrastructural projects, and entire communities in areas of sub-Saharan Africa and the Pacific who are facing irreversible environmental changes that could lead them to becoming permanently displaced. So we owe the global picture that we have today to the incredible work that's being done by a multitude of data sources on the ground, from IOM's DTM, UNHCR's site monitoring, or OCHA's humanitarian needs overviews, to government databases, civil society assessments, and media reports. So why is internal displacement data so critical? Well, there are many reasons for investing in quality data. Like I've said, first and foremost, it's about getting as accurate a picture as possible of what's happening on the ground so that we can prioritize resources and investments and be sure that we're making the right choices, be they programmatic, policy, or advocacy related. But good data on internal displacement is also key to understanding and forecasting broader migratory trends. As we've said, a number of the panelists have mentioned it already, internal displacement is an integral part of that global picture of human mobility, and it should be understood as being at times the beginning and at other times the endpoint of many other migratory and displacement flows. Once you also shine the light on the costs and the impacts of this displacement on individuals, on communities, and actual countries, you realize that internal displacement is as much a humanitarian challenge as it is a development one. Robust data and the analysis of it across multiple disciplines can also generate important insights about how displacement connects to other global challenges, from political instability and weak governance to poverty, food insecurity, climate change, disaster, and urban risk. Importantly, and this is a point that IDMC has been making repeatedly over the years, good data is also a precondition for setting global baselines and targets and for measuring the success of our collective efforts to reduce internal displacement in the long run. More and more often, governments, donors, and operational partners are actually asking us to help them measure the effectiveness of their intervention, but also to better anticipate and plan for the future. They're asking us for ways to assess the risk and the drivers of future displacement, and they want to understand what is most likely to mitigate or to prolong into the future the crises that they're already experiencing today. We're also being asked more and more to provide data and evidence on how the needs and vulnerabilities of IDPs evolve over time and how they compare with the needs of other communities inside a country. Now, this requires far more sophisticated data systems than the ones we currently have. Systems that can set baselines, control groups, that can track multiple dimensions and indicators over long periods of time and generate comparable and longitudinal data sets. This is going to be key for designing programs across the humanitarian development spectrum that can respond to IDP's immediate needs today, but that can also start now to mitigate the impact of this displacement on host communities and economies in the future. So what does the current data landscape look like? As I've said, many improvements have been made over the last decade in the way data on internal displacement is collected. The amount of data and the number of situations of displacement for which IDMC has been able to obtain data has grown exponentially. The challenge that we actually face is that the richness of actors collecting the data is matched by the diversity of data collection practices and the diversity of purposes for which this data is being collected. This can vary from demographic profiling exercises to tracking victims of armed conflicts, informing humanitarian needs assessments, producing national statistics, or reporting on the implementation of global policy agreements. So while all this data is essential for us, and we're very grateful for it, it still needs to be carefully triangulated and analyzed according to a consistent and a transparent logic. Because the displacement data ecosystem has now become so complex, there's sometimes confusion about the roles of different entities and the focus and scope of different initiatives. Broadly speaking, though, the main challenges when it comes to internal displacement data relate to issues of coordination, common standards and definitions, and interoperability. Take common standards, for example. There's no shortage of conceptual and legal guidance on internal displacement, from the guiding principles to the YASC framework on durable solutions. But translating these into common standards for data collection and analysis is actually far more difficult than one would think. There's no agreement, for example, on major questions such as how to systematically measure the end of displacement and what the best methods are for accurately capturing different stages and characteristics of displacement. There are processes right now, such as the Expert Group on Refugee and IDP Statistics, EGRIS, that are starting to address some of those challenges. Once it's finalized in 2020, the EGRIS recommendations will be a valuable resource for governments. But it won't solve all the problems, because in many displacement situations, it's likely that humanitarian and development agencies will continue to be the ones collecting the bulk of IDP data, and their operational planning and responses are always going to require different types of information beyond national statistics. The issue of data interoperability is another challenge for many of us. It means that data from different sources isn't always well joined up to help consolidate numbers and to create that holistic picture to support analysis and decision-making. In practice, different organizations define and monitor populations in very different ways. Even within organizations, there can be differences in how populations, their movements, and their needs are defined. This means that the data produced is often not comparable. At the national level, it can undermine the effectiveness of programming, and it can limit critical insights into trends, patterns, and linkages between different population movements. So what are we all doing about this? Well, at IDMC, I really would like to insist on the fact that we've been extremely impressed by the collective efforts that have been made over the years by governments and agencies to come up with better, more frequent, consistent, and collaborative approaches to data collection. Although IDMC is a small organization, we do have a key role to play in addressing some of the remaining gaps, and we're doing this with the support of our partners, IOM, UNHCR, OCHA, GIPS, and others. One key area of progress involves the development of innovative tools and methods to fill these gaps. We can now analyze different types of big data to identify incidents of internal displacement and to track patterns in near real time. Using our disaster displacement risk model, we've also established the framework to actually develop predictive analytics. These are tools that will give our community, from donors to operational actors, credible, timely evidence that's needed to inform their decision-making as these crises unfold. I've already mentioned the work of EGRIS, and just to echo what Mr. Grandi was saying about the GP20, the GP20 plan of action also has a strong focus on data as one of its 4 pillars. And one of the main aims of the data workstream is to identify and to promote good practices at the national level in pilot countries. Today, we're also announcing a new partnership between IDMC and IOM, which will capitalize on our 2 agencies' respective strengths to produce more relevant data and evidence, and ultimately to provide a better service to national governments and decision makers in responding to this issue. But of course, we can always do more, and we absolutely need to keep the level of ambition high. We would like to see internal displacement data being fully incorporated into existing reporting mechanisms from the national to the global level under frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and of course the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. Ultimately, we'd like to work much more closely and directly with those governments that are experiencing displacement, who retain the primary responsibility to address and to respond to this issue. We can help them develop the right kinds of data systems that will allow them to not just keep track of the numbers of people displaced inside their country, but also to monitor progress and to document what works and what doesn't in preventing and reducing this phenomenon. But it does need to be a collective effort, and we hope that the next decade will bring about as many innovations and advances as the last one did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and I thank all the members of the panel. Now, we turn to you. Those who want to take the floor, please, as usually, use your plaque to point out. And I will start by Yemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish to thank the entire and distinguished panelists for their comprehensive presentations. And Mr. Chair, looking back to the IDP situation in Yemen during the past years, we wish to commend some of the projects and initiatives. One of the good examples is the IOM initiative for providing mobile clinics for the IDPs and highly needed areas where such mobile units responded effectively to the urgent and primary health needs. I'll add the highly needed people and some of the IDPs camps. At the same time, we wish to commend another project of the UNHCR and along with some other international organizations for their cash-based intervention during the past years. And according to our experience in Yemen, cash-based intervention was an efficient tool for humanitarian assistance along with protecting the human dignity of the targeted people. Nevertheless, the issue of protection still a challenge, and where IDPs are lacking real protection and subjected to different kinds of abuses. Meanwhile, post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSDs, is another challenge in this regard, especially among women and children. Therefore, we do believe that such psychological issues needs more attention. And also in which establishing a specialized psychological centers for IDPs would help for more efficient outcomes. On the other hand, we wish to emphasize the importance of the multi-stakeholders approach where the social initiatives that aims at IDPs integration in the host communities need to be promoted and supported. Last but not least, Mr. Chair, it's highly important to establish a mechanism where states could exchange experiences and lessons related to IDPs integration and social cohesion. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Now I have a list of speakers. I will just read: Ecuador, Norway, Japan, Azerbaijan, France, Colombia, Honduras, Ethiopia, Philippines. So I will ask you to contain your comments within the limit of 3 minutes, so that we can have the opportunity from the panel to respond to your interventions. I think we had a very good example with the intervention of the Yemen representative. So during the next intervention from Ecuador, I will close the list of speakers. So those who want to speak, please flagship their plaque so that we can have a control of the time of our debate. Ecuador, please, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Queremos agradecer a los panelistas por sus intervenciones acerca de los desafíos en la respuesta y protección de las personas desplazadas internas. Este año se marca el 20º aniversario de los principios rectores de los desplazamientos internos. Sin embargo, nos preocupa que lamentablemente el número de desplazados aumenta y la frecuencia de los conflictos se agudiza. El surgimiento de amenazas de distinta índole ha generado nuevas dinámicas de movilidad. Esta situación implica la necesidad de garantizar desde el Estado el respeto de los derechos humanos y la protección de todas las personas desde una visión integral de desarrollo y seguridad. En el Ecuador, la Ley Orgánica de Movilidad Humana establece la transversalización del enfoque de movilidad humana, que incluye desplazamiento interno, por supuesto, en todas las políticas, planes y programas del Estado. Además, establece la promoción del ejercicio de los derechos humanos de las personas en movilidad humana en todas sus dimensiones. De la misma manera, el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo Toda una Vida y el Plan Nacional de Movilidad Humana incluyen, entre otros, el principio de igualdad a través de la promoción de políticas para erradicar todo tipo de discriminación en contra de las personas desplazadas. A pocos días de la adopción de los pactos mundiales para la migración y para los refugiados, Ecuador hace un llamado a todos los estados a reflexionar en la aplicación de los principios rectores de los desplazamientos internos en las leyes y políticas nacionales. A criterio del Ecuador, una visión basada en la responsabilidad compartida debe contener medidas para abordar y prevenir el desplazamiento interno y para atender las necesidades inmediatas de protección de las personas desplazadas. Esto, a su vez, tiene el potencial de prevenir y enfrentar directamente crisis de refugiados y migrantes. Para concluir, nos gustaría conocer con más detalle la manera en que la OIM y el ACNUR coordinarán su trabajo para asistir a los estados en el desarrollo o fortalecimiento de planes de prevención y respuesta para abordar los desafíos inherentes al desplazamiento interno. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. And I now give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Director General. Very good to see you here. Wish you all the best in your very important work in the years to come. And I would also like to thank the panelists for very useful presentations. Thank you so much. In the 2 decades since the adoption of the guiding principle, Norway has continuously engaged with partners to address and reduce internal displacement. A large part of Norway's humanitarian assistance targets internally displaced. We note with regret that in the same period, internal displacement as a result of armed conflict has roughly doubled. In addition, we see a significant rise in natural disaster-related displacement. Climate change and degradation of natural resources are likely to further drive up the numbers of IDPs in the future. We have for a long time known that many internally displaced persons are among those with the most urgent need for international humanitarian assistance and protection. In recent years, there has been an increased understanding that internal displacement is also a development challenge. Large-scale internal displacement hampers not only development for IDPs themselves, but also for the affected host communities and states. As the international community remain committed to leaving no one behind, IDPs is certainly a group that requires a lot more attention from us. Director General, we need new strategies for durable solutions to internal displacement that also include a long-term perspective for the affected host communities and states. This will require a whole-of-system approach from the UN and partners to internal displacement, which must include agencies with mandates in humanitarian, protection and development sectors. For this very reason, Norway and other states have proposed that the UN Secretary General appoints a high-level panel on internal displacement in order to assess and propose strategies for durable solutions for internal displacement in the future. Finally, Director General, we are pleased to see that IOM is taking this issue forward, including in partnership with the UNHCR, IDMC and the World Bank, and I would like to congratulate IOM and IDMC with their new partnership agreement. Next year, as we mark the 10th anniversary of the milestone Kampala Convention, we hope to see this cooperation deepen and lead to a revitalized international approach to internal displacement with long-term benefits for IDPs and hosts alike. Thank you, Director General.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Now I give the floor to the Ambassador of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Director General Vitorino, for arranging this discussion, and also to all the distinguished panelists. It was a very interesting discussion. Japan attaches importance to strengthening the resilience of the communities so that they can be also stand up in face of difficult situations. I noted with a lot of interest regarding the point that there are signs of the displaced, the increase in the displaced persons is a sign of some kind of crisis, and that there was a lot of point made about working together among UNHCR, World Bank, and others to IOM to use the information on the ground regarding displaced persons and having an analysis to help the international community become aware of the possibility of a crisis. And we think that prevention is very important, and I'm interested to know how do you plan to try to work together so that we can better deal with situations before they occur in terms of prevention. The third point, or the last point I like to make, is that there is a recognition that about the prolongation of the displacement. I mean, there are people who are displaced, and hopefully, you know, they will go back to their safe homes in a relatively short time. But we see a phenomenon of prolongation of the displacement situation. And I think this issue of trying to avoid the prolongation of displacement is another issue which we think is very important. And this point was not necessarily discussed during the discussion, and I'd like to know how the panelists plan to, what their views are on trying to address this particular aspect of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I give the floor to Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. At the outset, my delegation thanks IOM for organizing these discussions and distinguished panel for their insightful contributions on the topic that unfortunately too often remains in the shadows of the global focus on refugees and migrants. Although neither Global Compact on Refugees nor Global Compact on Migration reflects on IDP situations, we cannot ignore the simple fact that majority of the world's forcibly displaced are internally displaced persons. Time has come to boldly recognize that internal displacement in many cases is a source for subsequent onward journeys. We have to be clear in our minds, without the right and timely protection for IDPs today, tomorrow they may become refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants. References to IDPs in 2030 agenda, the goal set by the Agenda for Humanity to reduce the internal displacement by at least 50% by 2030, as well as the New York Declaration, which notes the need for reflection on effective strategies to ensure adequate protection, and assistance for IDPs, and to prevent and reduce such displacement, certainly a right vision, but need yet to be translated from words into action. The protracted nature of this situation should receive the attention it deserves. While fully recognizing the primary responsibility of national authorities to protect and assist IDPs, nevertheless, Azerbaijan continues to believe that more is needed to elevate the IDP problem within the UN system. In this context, we support both IEM and UNHCR's important role in the broader humanitarian response to help and assist IDPs, and commend them for its efforts to strengthen the response in situations of internal displacement. The World Bank Group is doing a great job in terms of development perspective. We acknowledge also the important role the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center has been playing in filling the knowledge gap on the global scale and patterns of internal displacement, and keeping the plight of IDPs high in the radar of international community. We salute the intention by the UN to initiate broader consultations on the humanitarian response toward IDPs next year, as it is a good opportunity to put this matter back in the spotlight and demonstrate that IDPs are not left behind. It's our firm belief that while moving ahead with more comprehensive response in forced displacement situations, we must redouble our efforts to tackle its causes. I thank you very much, Mr. Director General.
Thank you so much. Maintenant, je donne la parole à la France, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général. Permettez-moi en premier lieu de remercier les panélistes pour leurs interventions qui ont été vraiment très complètes et très utiles et qui montrent surtout l'importance de la coopération. Ah oui, excusez-moi. On ne peut pas bouger plus, désolé. Très bien. Qui montre l'importance de la coopération internationale, intersectorielle et interagences afin de répondre aux différents besoins des déplacés internes. Cette année revêt encore une dimension d'autant plus particulière que nous célébrons, comme vous l'avez souligné, le 20e anniversaire des principes directeurs relatifs aux personnes déplacées à l'intérieur de leur pays. La France s'est attachée à ces principes et salue le travail considérable de l'OIM et du UNHCR, notamment en termes d'assistance et de protection. Et ma délégation se réjouit que ce travail se fasse en toute synergie, comme l'a souligné le haut-commissaire M. Grandi, afin d'éviter la fragmentation et l'incohérence, comme le disait le commissaire M. Stylianides, source d'efficacité. Monsieur le Directeur Général, comme vous l'avez souligné, une réponse de long terme nécessite un engagement accru de la communauté internationale pour résoudre les causes profondes de ces déplacements. La France est engagée à accroître sa contribution globale humanitaire et de stabilisation pour atteindre 500 millions d'euros d'ici 2022. Il importe plus que jamais de poursuivre nos efforts à vos côtés dans l'esprit de responsabilité et de solidarité sur lesquels ont été fondées les Nations Unies que défend la France et d'autres. Enfin, la France souhaiterait savoir, sous forme d'interrogation, aussi bien l'OIM que l'UNHCR, sur la manière dont ils comptent renforcer leurs réponses de manière complémentaire. On a évoqué effectivement la synergie, notamment aux besoins croissants des déplacés internes. La question reste importante. Par ailleurs, et ma délégation se réjouit de ce que M. Verbeek a beaucoup insisté sur le rôle de la Banque mondiale et sur l'importance des déplacés pour des raisons climatiques. Notre délégation aimerait savoir, dans la lignée de l'accord qui existe entre la Banque mondiale et l'UNHCR, dans quelle mesure ce soutien aux activités de l'OIM destinées aux déplacés internes est pris en compte, ou est-ce que ça rentre dans le cadre de la synergie? Enfin, j'aimerais pouvoir poser une dernière question à Madame Bilac, et très bien de représenter la gente féminine au sein de ce panel, de son exposé très intéressant, en particulier sur la dimension projection et perspective. Ma délégation s'est interrogée sur le fait de savoir dans quelle mesure ces travaux pourraient servir la réflexion et les travaux notamment de la Banque mondiale et d'autres en matière de prévention. Merci.
Merci bien, madame. Ahora doy la palabra al representante de Colombia.
Gracias, señor director general. Seré breve. Agradecemos la presentación de los panelistas. En materia de desplazamiento interno, con base en nuestra propia experiencia nacional, quisiéramos señalar 3 elementos que consideramos de suma importancia para lograr una respuesta integral a este fenómeno, los cuales ya han sido señalados por los panelistas. En primer lugar, la respuesta al fenómeno del desplazamiento interno tiene que ir más allá de la asistencia humanitaria y debe estar orientada a soluciones que garanticen el tránsito de la asistencia hacia el desarrollo y la inclusión social sostenible de la población desplazada. En segundo lugar, este tránsito debe a su vez sustentarse en sistemas de registro, de estadísticas y de producción de datos robustos que permitan identificar tanto las necesidades como los avances concretos y medibles hacia soluciones. Tercero y último, una respuesta integral orientada hacia las soluciones debe estar basada en la articulación de políticas sectoriales en un amplio rango de acción que favorezca también a las comunidades de acogida. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Y ahora doy la palabra al representante de Honduras.
Gracias, director general. Las mujeres y los niños constituyen el mayor porcentaje de desplazados internos a nivel mundial. Sabemos que solo a través de la voluntad política de los Estados, basada en los derechos humanos, se puede alcanzar el desarrollo de marcos opcionales para la integración local, reubicación y reasentamientos en territorio nacional, que son considerados mayormente como respuestas aplicables a una estrategia alternativa de opciones duraderas para los IDPs, sin dejar a un lado el apoyo internacional. Si bien la colaboración interinstitucional y los esfuerzos multisectoriales en Honduras han fortalecido nuestra política nacional de atención, comprensión, tratamiento y tipificación del desplazamiento interno, lo cual ha traído como resultados estudios de caracterización para bases de datos de información cuantitativa y cualitativa, la construcción de un marco legal para la prevención y protección de personas desplazadas internamente, y así consolidar una mejor estructura de gobernanza operativa institucional. Es por eso que mi delegación, en adición a lo manifestado y desde una perspectiva internacional, nos gustaría conocer sus ilustradas impresiones sobre lo siguiente. La implementación de iniciativas al tratamiento de personas desplazadas internamente podría ser posicionada como una acción complementaria o preventiva de colaboración entre la ACNUR y la OIM. Habría entonces una mejor dualidad de abordaje en elementos humanitarios y de protección, tomando en cuenta que estos grupos especiales suponen no cruzar fronteras. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Now I give the floor to the Ambassador of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me first of all thank all the panelists for their presentation. What I would like to focus, of course, out here to your appeal to make a brief intervention. I'm glad, frankly, to speak that this is for the first time I see the enhanced engagement of major United Nations and other affiliated organizations giving focus on IDPs, given the fact that IDPs, unfortunately, has not been featured strongly in any international agreement or document. We all remember that even starting from Istanbul in 2016, there was not any serious discussion on this, and then finally a follow-up mechanism for it. We know that in case of refugee and migration, we have a compact, but nevertheless, for many years, we have this guiding principle for IDPs, which is non-binding. Ethiopia is joining the steering committee which is working towards a 3-year strategy plan. Hopefully, we'll be able to see more concrete assistance coming in terms of a long-term approach. The second point which I would like to mention here, of course, our minister has in his presentation indicated, but I would like to stress that the Ethiopian approach is totally abandons the silos approach, the fragmentation approach to IDPs in terms of prevention, assistance, and protection of the IDPs. What we are focusing our strategy is on emergency response, peace building, and durable solution. which is also the resolution is linked to the linkage between humanitarian and development, which is also, again, based on the new way of working of the United Nations. This is totally in line with the United Nations Secretary General, the prevention of the agenda, the prevention of the IDP's agenda. The second thing which I would like to focus, the third thing which I would like to focus is we all know that it is a major responsibility of states when it comes to addressing this problem, but at the same time, non-state actors are so equally playing an important role, a key role, in fact, in some of the cases. I don't know actually how much this international organization is closely working together by having a strategy, especially in terms of the long-term approach of addressing this issue. And finally, I would like to ask the World Bank from which facility that the World Bank is intending to assist the IDPs. We know that IDA 18 is for refugees. If you can shed light on this, I would be very happy. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to the Ambassador of Philippines.
Thank you very much, Director General. Thank you for moderating this very interesting panel, and our appreciation to all the speakers. Natural disasters brought on by typhoons, floods, and earthquakes, as well as conflict, leave thousands displaced for short or protracted periods of time. Development and rehabilitation efforts also do result in displacement. We are committed to managing displacement in better ways. There is no avoiding displacement caused by natural disasters, but through our national resolve and with the help of the IOM and other partners, we are working on key interventions to achieve better outcomes in the provision of shelter, camp coordination, camp management, physical and psychosocial interventions, and recovery. We are also focused on prevention by building resilience in all development policies, as well as pursuing peace policies that try to bring stability and livelihood to areas of conflict, which would better enable inhabitants to respond to instances of displacement. We have a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, which oversees civil defense at local and national levels to plan and lead the guiding activities in the field of communication, warning signals, emergency, transportation, evacuation, rescue, engineering, health and rehabilitation, public education, and auxiliary services, such as firefighting and the police. Noting that the work of DRR is no longer best served by an ad hoc council, given the continued challenges brought about by climate change, among others, the President, in his State of the Nation address this year, called on the legislature to create a Department of Disaster Management. We look forward to the assistance and advice of the IOM and our other partners as we craft the laws and guidelines on public policy for this issue. And in conclusion, we would like to also thank the IDMC for its cooperation in the past, and we welcome the indication that they will intend to increase cooperation with member states, and we would like to be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I have in my notes that the United States wants to take the floor, please. U.S.
Thank you very much. And I too want to thank you for organizing this panel and for the panelists' participation. The Norwegian ambassador mentioned the high-level panel that's going to be established and part of the 20th anniversary of the guidelines. I'm sure every one of you are going to be interviewed by this panel. And so I'm wondering, what is the one thing you would want to make sure the panel takes away that would really be a game changer in terms of how the international community deals with IDPs? I think the World Bank's role in refugees now has been a game changer. I think the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework has been a game changer, but I'm wondering, are people thinking about real game changers in terms of how we deal with IDPs 20 years after the guidelines were established? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have no further speakers, so I will propose now to turn to the speakers, so asking them to use 5 minutes each to address the questions. And I will propose to follow the reversed order. And this time, yes, politically correctly, ladies first.
Thank you very much, Director General. I'd like to respond to three points that were raised by the audience. The first one came from the Japanese delegation about the protractedness of internal displacement. It's true perhaps that it wasn't addressed in much detail by any of us today, but this is one of the key points that we have been making and that we've been showing through the data and through our analysis, is that nowadays a situation of internal displacement that gets resolved overnight does not exist. It's a rarity. And we have demonstrated that, of course, across the conflict context that we monitor, but also in many of the disaster settings that we track. Even though a large number of people manage to return following a disaster, there always remains a pocket of vulnerable people and communities who find it difficult to find a solution and who can remain displaced for a number of years following a disaster. So protracted internal displacement, I know this is a phrase that has often been used, but it is indeed becoming the norm, and it isn't just specific to conflict and violent contexts. I like the question coming from the US on the game changer. We have thought about this a lot at IDMC. If I may, I would give two key things that we would like to see happening if a high-level panel or indeed any international level initiative on internal displacement were to happen next year as part of the anniversary initiatives. One is, I think, in recognition of the fact that we've all acknowledged today that internal displacement is far more than a humanitarian issue and that it cuts across so many other technical mandates, technical sectors, mandates, disciplines, etc. It needs to be addressed as such, and we would very much like to actually follow the example that has been shown by the government of Ethiopia in incorporating the issue of internal displacement as part of a national development plan, as an integral part of a longer-term, multi-annual, sustainable development plan. And that has to happen both at the national level, but it then needs to be aggregated somehow at the global level. And we would hope that one of the outcomes of a high-level panel, discussion would acknowledge that and would land on such a conclusion. And I think the other key issue that such a high-level discussion would have to address is the issue of political leadership. We've also acknowledged that internal displacement can be a sensitive question, that of course national governments need to take the lead in finding solutions, and they need to be given the space to find those solutions. But somehow at the international level there also needs to be, again, an aggregation of those efforts and a clear political signal that this issue is an important one that requires an international level response. Je vais répondre en français à la question de la délégation française, que je remercie pour ces quelques mots au sujet de la modélisation qu'IDMC a faite pour les catastrophes à caractère climatique. Nous avons développé un modèle global qui se projette dans l'avenir et qui essaye d'estimer en fait le risque des déplacements de populations liés à ces catastrophes à travers le monde. Nous en sommes à la deuxième version de ce modèle. Le modèle n'est pas encore parfait. Il requiert encore énormément de données. On a besoin de l'adapter au niveau national et au niveau régional. Et nous sommes très heureux d'être en phase de négociation, on va dire, pour l'adapter dans la zone du Pacifique, qui permettra de mieux comprendre certains des facteurs qui peuvent amener certaines personnes à être déplacées par des catastrophes à caractère rapide et aussi des catastrophes plus lentes, mais aussi qui pourra donner des outils au gouvernement de la région pour pouvoir mieux anticiper, pour pouvoir mieux se préparer à ces déplacements à l'avenir. Nous espérons aussi pouvoir incorporer d'autres d'autres facteurs dans ce modèle à l'avenir, donc pas seulement des facteurs climatiques et environnementaux, mais aussi et essentiellement des facteurs politiques liés à la gouvernance qui pourraient aussi nous permettre d'appliquer ce modèle à des zones de conflit et de pouvoir vraiment mieux comprendre la multidimensionnalité en fait, du phénomène. Nous sommes convaincus que ce type de modèle qui permet d'anticiper en fait l'avenir vraiment fait partie de la réponse qu'on doit apporter à ce phénomène. Ce n'est plus suffisant de simplement s'intéresser à ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. Il faut qu'on puisse se projeter dans les années et les décennies qui vont venir. Et c'est là que nous voulons mettre une bonne partie de nos ressources dans les années à venir. Merci.
Merci bien. I now give the floor to Commissioner Stylianidis. Christos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you so much for your very helpful contribution in this very demanding field. I would like to raise just 3 points. First of all, I would like to focus on really tragic situation, humanitarian situation in Yemen. Is maybe the most tragic humanitarian crisis in the world now. We are trying to avoid a famine. However, the only way to stop this ongoing humanitarian tragedy is through a political solution that would attend to the violence. As we saw, the signs is little bit positive. We have a window of opportunity now, and I'm hoping to see a positive development. European Union 2 weeks ago announced 90 million euros in humanitarian aid, bringing total for this year to 180 million euros. And as I said, we are in a race against time to avoid a famine. So thank you, Ambassador for Yemen, for your contribution. But as I said, unfortunately, in humanitarian problems, we need political solutions. This is the most important. The humanitarian aid just to alleviate the suffering of the people. Second point about the prevention and the consequences due to natural disasters and, of course, climate change. I totally agree with the Japanese representative that, first of all, and above all, we have to find ways in order to increase the prevention and preparedness. And this is why European Union already adopted unanimously a new proposal to upgrade the current civil protection European mechanisms, so-called RESC-EU. We are in the last mile to adopt as a new legislation. And of course, as you know, European Union civil protection mechanisms can deliver assistance not only inside Europe, but also outside Europe. And of course, for the European Union, is something very special, very concrete. And at the same time, we focus on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we are leading by example on this implementation. And even here, I have to say that we have to follow the Paris Agreement in order to reduce the consequences and the repercussions of the climate change. It's the only way for all of us. My last point about a USA question, game changer. Definitely, we have to find new ways, innovative ways, in order to deal with this demanding issue, IDPs. And now, we follow our common framework guiding principles. Maybe it's a time to see something beyond, maybe global compact. I know that remains controversial. weird thing to say about global compact, even inside the European Union. You know that in some extent we are divided on this issue. But we have to think about this, and why not? I personally believe in this. Thank you so much, Antonio.
Thank you, Christos. Now I turn to Jos.
Thank you, Vittorio. While listening, I was actually very happy to hear that, that many of you put forward the importance of collaboration and coordination among humanitarian and development actors. I'm also very happy to hear, in a sense, that the importance of data, to have a good understanding of who is who and where is everybody. Importance of prevention, also to hear from you the importance of multifaceted approaches. So that I feel that what we are trying to do here with the people behind the table as actors, we actually seem to be very thinking along the same lines as what you are putting forward towards us. The Honorable Representative of Ethiopia asked me about how the World Bank is supporting IDPs. We're supporting IDPs actually through our normal country program. The IDA 18 is about over $70 billion over a 3-year period, of which the special window for refugees takes up around $2 billion. So there's around 55, 60 billion, I think, that is unearmarked and comes to the countries themselves. So there, of course, then within the dialogue that the country has with the bank, and probably also with other partners, it can decide on how it would use these resources that are allocated, in this case then to Ethiopia, on how much it wants to use for internally displaced people. That's really up to the, in a sense, in the dialogue between, I guess, the World Bank and the country. But we are a country-driven organization, so the country is very much in the driver's seat in how it wants to use the resources that it has access to from the World Bank. The other issue, what are the game changers? And actually I was thinking, it's a bit tough to say. I wouldn't think that the game changer would be maybe a specific fund within the bank to deal with internally displaced people, but maybe it is. Maybe it's following the example that has happened on the IDA 18 for refugee and host communities, or the global concessional facility for middle-income countries. Maybe something like that is an opportunity, again, to put the emphasis on that we have to deal also with internally displaced people better. And of course, the upcoming IDA 19 discussions in a year or so are actually starting now. Might be a good platform to start thinking around this thing. The other thing I thought myself, and maybe more in a direct, practical way maybe, is to really think also more about prevention as a game changer. And that we have to take it much more seriously. And in the bank, we're starting, well, again, because many of you are also who are here are also our shareholders, and our clients are asking for this type of support. And I think but at the same time, of course, we also need to realize, as we hear, that it's very often a political issue, is of course that sometimes countries do not want to really acknowledge that they have an internal issue. And then if we are a country-driven model, then of course it's very difficult for us to push certain things onto the country. Lastly, maybe another game changer is really also on data. If we are able to show better that the situation of internally displaced people is much worse than the average or of other groups in the countries, then in a sense we have much more in our hand to talk with governments and to talk with all of you to say we really have to do something better here. So let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Filippo, you want to join? No?
Yeah, very quickly. Much has been said already, but I think it's worth stressing a couple of points. One, and of course the first intervention by Yemen inspires me to say this. We should not forget that even in terms of sheer humanitarian response to crises of internal displacement, very often the biggest obstacle is access. Because internally displaced people are, at least those that are generated by conflict, are in the conflict. You know, refugees usually go outside of that country and are outside of the conflict, but IDPs stay trapped, very often trapped. Look at what's happened in Syria in the past 3-4 years, trapped inside in situations of conflict. Access becomes extremely difficult, dangerous, difficult, prohibited, restricted, etc., etc., etc. And what we see today in Yemen, sorry to say, even at the political level, doesn't bode very well. If military logic prevails instead of a political one, we will have an access problem to IDP situation. And I think it is good that all of us remember this when we speak about this matter. On the prolonged situation, I want to echo what Alexander already said. Of course, when it is conflict-related, because this is where the prolongation usually happens, you have to solve the conflict to allow people to return. However, I think that's already been commented a lot, I won't repeat. What is perhaps more interesting, I tried to also mention it earlier, is what do you do in cases where either conflict is not resolved or maybe imperfectly resolved, or resolved but needs time for the peace to be rolled out. I think Colombia is a very good case in point. Are there solutions that can be pursued? Yes, I think that what we have done over more than 20 years in Colombia with the displaced is very interesting. We know that many, and the government knows that most of the IDPs may not even go back to their homes anymore. That is linked very closely to urbanization. In many situations, in Afghanistan, in Colombia, in Somalia, IDPs are destined to become part of the urban population, and they are not necessarily coming from the cities. So it's a different logic that has to be applied there for solutions, even during the prolonged period of time. On prevention, all I can say is that, this is one of the most difficult topics of all. I think it's good for all of us to always say we want to strengthen the agenda for prevention. How you do it, which is the question many of you ask, is much more difficult. The Secretary General, of course, has put the prevention agenda very much in the forefront of the UN reform and of the UN agenda, and that's good. Good also from the humanitarian point of view. But that requires international cooperation, be it on climate, on poverty reduction through the SDGs, or on peace, which affects directly humanitarian issues. If there is no international cooperation, there will be no prevention. And what we see in terms of peeling off from the multilateral agenda is not going to be good for prevention. National responses, inward-looking, state-by-state responses will prevent prevention, if I may say. So I think it's important that we reflect on that as well. Two more points. One is very much agree with what the World Bank is doing and thinking, because inclusion is fundamental, and especially in the case of IDPs. These are nationals from their own country, so it is a duty of those governments to have them included in their development plans, be education, employment, even while they're displaced, they're still in those countries. So I think that anything that the World Bank and other institutions can do to develop financial instruments to support that inclusion will be positive. One thing that I may say, we have the World Bank here, which has been a pioneer in this area, but this should also be followed by other international financial institutions, and the World Bank is trying to lead there, but also by bilateral cooperation organizations. And many of you have huge, large bilateral development agencies, which we would like to encourage to come on board, both on the refugee side and IDP side. And finally, I let Antonio respond on this, which is a very difficult question about how do we coordinate. But one thing I want to say, if I may say this, Antonio, we have a new DG. He's in his second or third month. He's had this council now. He has a challenging GCM ahead of him. I think we need to be a little bit understanding of the pressures, but one thing I can say is that closer cooperation and clearer cooperation between IOM and UNHCR, including on this area of IDPs, is work in progress, but it is in progress and will deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Filippo. Now, Commissioner, please.
Thank you. I will respond to the question which was raised by Japan on protracted displacement. I think it depends on the speed at which we are reacting on durable solutions. As long as we are able to speed up the durable solution, we can shorten the protracted displacement. in conflict-induced as well as climate-induced displacement cases, so that the prevention and the durable solution should be taken into consideration as displacement has multiplier driving natures. There are climate-induced disasters due to drought, flood, typhoon, cyclone, and so on, as well as there are conflicts-induced displacement across the globe, so that we have to identify the nature and the driving forces of the displacement cases. Based on these cases, we have to react on prevention and durable solution measures, so that we have to invest on the durable solutions based on the source of the conflict, source of climate-induced disasters. This is my first comment. The second one, IDP case should not be looked and it should not be left to one country. It has international nature. If you take Ethiopia, as I mentioned in my presentation, currently does have 2.8 million IDP cases. At the same time, Ethiopia is hosting close to 1 million refugees from neighboring countries, mainly from South Sudan. So if Ethiopia fails to respond to both IDPs and refugees, it is a challenge. This camp could be incubation center for international migration. It reaches Europe, developed nations, and other neighboring countries, so that due attention should be given to the IDP case based on the 3 global agendas that we agreed in a number of times: sustainable development goals, creating jobs for youth, unemployment youth, poverty reduction are the key, climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. On the other hand, we have to invest on peace and stability and reconciliation. These are one of the measures to be taken to drive the sources of the IDP, the sources of the migration. The third point, what I want to stress is the IDP case. The IDP case, as I mentioned earlier, it has a multiple driving forces, so that the international cooperation, just what we have doing for other interventions, the international cooperation should be put in place. First. Second, political commitment from states should be taken into consideration, so that if we are able to join our hands, we can control, we can prevent, and we can pave the way for durable solution to seize the case of internal displacement and migration.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank the panelists. I must say that we were not expecting any game changer from this panel, but we had some objectives, I must confess. The first one being that sometimes when we address IDPs, member states have the suspicion that from the international community, we are trying to grab this issue on us. And one important thing is to say, listen, the message is very clear. We consider this issue a state responsibility. And we call your attention upon the fact that the figures are impressive. The numbers will be on the rise. The need to have international cooperation is mounting. So please take up your responsibilities. Lead the process. And we are prepared, we are with the boots on the ground, we are prepared to follow you. But we need your political commitment and your leadership. And then we will do our job. So we are not trying to take over an issue. Even more because, as I've tried to clarify, we work together, several agencies. UNHCR and ourselves are very much present on the ground. OSHA is with us on a number of crises. But we need to overcome the crisis mood and have a more systemic framework to address this challenge. That's our appeal. And that was the purpose of this panel, was to call your attention upon this need and for your responsibility and for our readiness to follow your guidance. There is a second important message in our perspective, that we need to have a multi-sectorial approach to this phenomenon. There is an humanitarian dimension, and we have been doing our job. Oh God, we have been doing our job. But there is also a development link, which is badly needed. There is also a protection dimension. Yes, the UNHCR have been dealing with that. There is a migration mobility issue. We are very much, IOM is very much involved in that. There is a peace building dimension. Recovery, transition, of countries and communities. And this overall comprehension is needed. And so the mobilization of the resources according to the challenge. Last but not least, yes, we were trying to call your attention upon the fact that IDPs means a cycle. It's not a static picture, it's a cycle. There is prevention, before, there is during, support, and there is the day after. And if it is true that in some cases, as the Japanese ambassador underlined, return is possible, because the conflict has been ended, because there is a process of national reconciliation, of national reconstruction, you should bear in mind that in some cases, mainly in climate change impacts, return might not be possible. And there the challenge is to build a livelihood for those who have been displaced, but will be, quote unquote, condemned to live in the place of displacement. But to contain them there, to prevent that they find the necessity to move any further. And that is also development policy. That calls upon donors and international financial organizations. So are these 3 points a game changer? Vielleicht nicht. Maybe not. But at least it was our honest attempt to bring your attention to a very key issue. And I thank very much the panelists for having joined us and making it clear. I think there is this very small film now, a thriller of 2 minutes. It's very short. It's just to introduce an exhibition that is outside, and you can have a look on the exhibition. So you have the opportunity to experience virtually their stories outside.